Mike, we've kept you, thank you so much for giving us feedback, but I think, Motlatsi, we've kept you quiet for way too long. And we're certainly looking forward to hearing more from you, particularly given the portfolio that you take care of. Our next speaker is Motlatsi Mutlanyane. He's the head of alternative investments at Momentum Investments. Now, he has been leading Momentum Alternative Investments since 2011. And Motlatsi, you're really going to help us unpack how this really can be tangible and realistic. We're looking at the particular purpose of the impact fund, and of course, certainly identifying how best it is that this can be made real for us. And I'm hoping that you can unpack, where is it that the thinking is behind these investment opportunities in terms of making it tangible, not only in terms of the economic outcomes for the country, but most importantly, the returns and the outcomes that investors are also looking for.
Thanks, Gruber. Yes, I guess my team and I our job is really to move away from the aspirational or the conceptual and to actually look at practically how do we now turn it into reality, right? And this is what the three funds that Mike has spoken to earlier are actually intent on doing. So if we focus, let's say on the first one, the Alternative Energy Fund, this fund, we trying to get our investors to get exposure to companies and to projects that are involved in various clean energy generation projects, energy efficiency, energy conservation, right? And to give you an example, so the kind of technologies we're looking at just normal solar, we're looking at concentrated solar, at wind and hydroelectric. We'll later obviously be looking into hydrogen technology and into energy storage. But that technology is still some way off before it gets to critical stage. So those are the kind of themes that this fund is focused squarely on. We are looking specifically to direct it in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that Mike has spoken to. So we're looking, for instance, at affordable and clean energy, at climate action, innovation and infrastructure, good jobs, and economic growth. And maybe just to give you an example of one of our renewable projects that we've invested in, we'll show you a video now of our Ilanga concentrated solar power project. This is a project out in Uppington that came out of the Renewable Energy Power Producer Program, out of bid window 3, I think, back in 2012. The project came online in 2019, so it's had about 2 years of operating track record. It generates about 100 megawatts of power, and it has 5 hours of storage, so which means that it's able to dispatch electricity even into the evening peak and long after the sun has gone down.
I'm tempted to say make it practical for us in terms of households or community. How many households can that light up?
So 100 megawatts supplies over 10,000 homes. But obviously that's just one metric. There are other metrics that we look at in terms of the kind of jobs that are created, the impact on the surrounding community. So in Uppington specifically, there are 2 communities that this project is going to benefit, right? And this is in terms of just community development programs, but we've also put entrepreneurship training programs in place for that. And we've set up also a trust that funds some of the schools and community projects that are going on in the project. So I must say, the kind of things that have been able to come out of this have been fantastic, just in general. And the project has gone over and above what it was actually required to do by regulations. We've actually introduced other things over and above what was actually required of us. So maybe we can show the video now.
The need to protect our planet's resources and to find new and more efficient ways to feed our growing energy needs are not only sensible strategic imperatives for any business, but also critical to help ensure the future survival of life on Earth as we know it. As investors in a number of large, sustainable energy projects, we at Momentum Investments are proud to be part of this growing movement towards more efficient, more cost-effective, and more reliable energy sources. Given the wealth of natural resources in our country, South Africa is perfectly poised to build large-scale projects that can provide energy to our national grid for decades to come. Momentum Investments has a long and proud history of investing in renewable energy, having invested 1.6 billion rand through time. The Momentum Alternative Energy Fund continues this proud legacy. 2 of these projects, Umoya Independent Wind Power Producer situated in Hopefield on the west coast and Ilanga Concentrated Solar Power Plant near Uppington, are groundbreaking projects that are already helping to create a brighter tomorrow for all. Not only do these projects provide power to thousands of homes, but their individual commitment to local upliftment has created a multitude of jobs in their local communities, and the much-needed financial upliftment helps change the lives of the communities in which they operate. Our involvement in these projects is another way that we show our commitment to doing well by doing good, and is a true indicator of what we mean when we say, with us, investing is personal.
Certainly looks quite interesting, right? And insightful. Investing certainly made personal, and definitely ticking off the box in terms of the E, the S, and of course emphasis on the G. So really, as you said, Motlatsi earlier, are not only setting the bar, but actually beating it and exceeding expectations that we've seen. Motlatsi, if we do come back to the South African environment, we're well aware of the inequalities that we face and, of course, the lack of infrastructural development that we require. Now, the investment in economic infrastructure certainly makes sense because we're able to see significant ripple effects there, job creation at scale. But, of course, we're also well aware that our population does need to be serviced. And that brings about the argument between economic versus social infrastructure and which of the two perhaps needs to be prioritized.
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying that there has been almost a skewed focus on economic infrastructure. And not to say that is a bad thing. It obviously is a great thing because, as you say, economic infrastructure is probably the best way to revive the economy and to create jobs. However, what it does is that it means that there's a shortfall, I guess, in what we should be investing on the social side. And that obviously impedes communities in terms of growth and development. But it also means that people are unable then to actually be actively involved in the economy. So those opportunities to be able to convert their abilities and, or at least their training into economic productivity are shortened or at least are hindered by not actually investing in social infrastructure. So one of the things, I guess, that ties in with your earlier question about Regulation 28 is that because institutional shareholders can actually invest more in infrastructure, it's been helped, I guess, by the presidency office that Mike was talking to. In total, there's a gap of about 502 billion that's been identified of mostly social infrastructure projects that need funding, right? So government obviously is trying to fund some of these. But I guess it's looking more on institutional investors to see how they can help out with this, because obviously that's where most of the actual capital resides. So I guess the initiatives now obviously to try and crowd the private sector in and to get them to fund these. And to that end, government has identified some 276 projects that they're trying to get to a stage where they can actually be bankable and be able actually to convert them into projects that the private sector would be able to invest in. So that's certainly something that we are involved in, and we're hoping that obviously more and more of our competitors will also be involved in, so that we can actually leverage everyone's funding and capital to be able to get those projects on the go.
I was about to say, you took the words out of my mouth, because I was about to say, well, as a representative of the private sector, is Momentum Investments keen and eager to participate?
Yeah, certainly. So if we look, for instance, at our social infrastructure fund, I guess it's a good pointing case of how we're getting involved in some of this. Now, the social infrastructure fund, the intention there is to get our investors to allocate capital to social accommodation projects. We see these as, first of all, the easiest one, I guess, to get off the ground and get funding, but also because there's actually a dire need, as you know, of accommodation in South Africa, right across, right? To give you an example, the Department of Education, I guess, mentioned that just in the higher education space alone, there's a shortage of some 300,000 beds for students, right? Now, it costs some 54,000 to provide a student with bed and board, right? So when we look at this, we see it obviously as something that we can easily do and get our investors to contribute in. There's a measurable social impact that's there, and also the returns from it are actually quite comparable with what they're getting in the listed space. So it's certainly for us something that we can easily accomplish. In addition to that, we've got some really good partnerships in terms of specialist developers who can actually put up these buildings and manage them. So we've got good partnerships on the development side and service providers. And we're able then to use that, those relationships to be able to provide secure and safe environment for students to study in. We've also got a video on that.
Quite exciting, because at least you're keeping us on the ball here to actually witness these investments.
Yeah, that's right. Because like I said, we're trying to show you practically what we're doing on the ground. The next video will show you what we're doing in Hatfield. So the projects that we've got on there, that's Units on Park that was launched just over a year ago.
Pre-COVID?
Yes, that's right, just before COVID, yeah. And so we've got some good track record just in terms of the cash flows that are coming in there, but more importantly from student experience. It's a 900 plus bed facility. So we've actually got students who've been living in there for about 18 months now. And I guess we can share some of their experience and what they think of that.
Certainly.
Social infrastructure investment has garnered a lot of attention lately. Our focus started on student accommodation, and as interest in these projects increased, we have broadened the mandate on this fund to incorporate other types of social infrastructure, such as lower cost housing and healthcare facilities. The ongoing growth in the need for affordable, well-situated and functional student accommodation has given rise to a number of opportunities for us to be part of this new and exciting investment landscape. Through our partnership with Eris Property Group, we have invested in the development of the beautiful and somewhat iconic units on Park. Situated only 600 meters from the University of Pretoria's campuses and with all the amenities our students require, these apartments provide the perfect, safe and functional environment to give our students their best shot at success. With 998 beds in 288 units, free Wi-Fi, great living spaces, and a host of other amenities, Units on Park puts the keys to success firmly in the grasp of those who live there. With a firm focus on social infrastructure and the commitment to quality education as guiding principles in our journey towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we invest responsibly to give great returns for our investors, as well as help build a whole new generation of leaders to move our country forward. As a business investment, student accommodation makes perfect sense. As a social investment within the Momentum Social Infrastructure Fund, being part of the next generation of leaders is an absolute imperative. Because for us, investing is personal.
Well, that's quite a bit of detail on that social infrastructure fund. But I do understand that Mike did also allude to 3 other funds that might be available. And I'm keen for you to also give us some insight into the others. Yeah,
before we get on to that, maybe I should just add on this one that, this is obviously our flagship development. We're very proud of this. And you can see it looks fantastic. I don't know about when you were at...
Far from
yeah, exactly. I didn't live. I would love to go live there. It looks so nice. Yeah, and they've got free Wi-Fi. So what's there not to like?
Exactly.
And I must also add that we are developing similar facilities. There's one actually that now has just started. Demolitions have started in Braamfontein, right across from Wits. And that's also going to be about 940 beds facility. And that's going to catch obviously students from Wits, from UJ, and from all the other institutions around Braamfontein. So that's going to take about 18 months, I guess. So that will be ready for 2024 intake. The other projects that we're starting, it's just signed off now. So we're expecting that development there will be starting by October. At the latest, sometime in November, is in Cape Town. So in the Cape Town City Ball. That's going to be the largest facility in the country. So we're building a 3,000 bed facility there in the Cape Town area. So we're also very excited about, because that's also going to capture quite a lot of institutions around the Cape Town area. And we've also got some ideas about how to use it also during school vacations, that we can actually open it to the public for travelers coming in, that they can use it for almost like Airbnb.
And that ties into a question that had immediately crossed my mind in terms of understanding the outlook for the property sector, right? I guess with the advent of the pandemic and uncertainty about what this working from home, studying from home environment looks like, many might question an investment in the property space. But as you say, not only does it take the responsible investment metrics that we are applying, but clearly from a numbers point of view, the investment does make sense.
Yeah. Certainly. We were also quite concerned, like everybody was in the direct property space, about what the impact of COVID will be, just in terms of the use of the facility, the revenue will be generating from there. But our actual experience has been very positive. Students actually want to be in the facility simply because that's where they can study and they can actually be able to focus on their education. So during the after March, let me put it that way, our actual resident students in the facility were over 80%.
Sure.
And it's only come up since then. So at the moment we're running at about 95%, which is exactly what we expected in any event. So that's where the projections have been.
Talk about resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is exactly that about this process. So students actually do prefer that simply because they have all the amenities that they need. As I mentioned, they get the free Wi-Fi, they get obviously laundry and everything done there, and they then get the computer labs and everything in the property that they actually can get their studies done. So universities have been working. They've been, tuition has been going on. So the facility has been operating as if there's been no COVID at all. Mm-hmm. So that's why we actually have been quite positive. So long may it continue like this. Just one last thing. I think obviously that this will develop and evolve in different ways, and we'll see how that works. But we're still quite confident that, particularly from the undergrad perspective, that a facility like this will still make a lot of sense. I think for the more senior students, things may evolve, and working and studying from home may slightly have different dynamics. But from this facility, which is very, very much focused on undergraduate students, we're still quite comfortable that the market is there and we'll be able to service it accordingly.
Motlatsi, I'm quite aware that this is one particular fund that we've really paid quite a bit of focus on, but yes. I am aware that there might be others. Mike did touch on 3 others earlier on, and I understand that there's another that we should be mindful of as potential investors.
Yes, there is. So that's our diversified infrastructure fund, right? So Mike did kind of mention this when he was giving an overview of our funds. And the intention with our infrastructure fund is we're looking here for growth capital, particularly in the mid-market space. Right, so we're looking for those companies that they own real assets, they're operating assets, so they've got track records, and they're creating value in the long term. Right, the opportunities in there and the ability to scale up is huge, and we think that all that most of these companies need is particularly on the equity side, equity capital, which is what we're providing, but we're also providing debt funding. If they're looking to crowd in other investors in, we're able to do that too. So to give you an example of the kind of things that we're looking at. So this is outside, I guess, of what we talked about in the housing space and the accommodation space. We're looking at water solution and wastewater recycling. We're looking at retail centers, particularly within the community. So this is outside of the urban areas. We're also looking, to a lesser extent, though, at core infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So this is, your road, rail, and that kind of technology. And in addition to that is also obviously telecoms, that we obviously is now come up now as a technology of interest, and where most of the funding should be directed, and also then obviously data centers and logistics. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of area that the diversified infrastructure we'll be looking at, and we're obviously looking to partner with like-minded investors. So investors where this makes sense for them, and this is the kind of exposure that they're looking for, that's who we're looking to attract. But we're also looking obviously for operators, because we're investing in operators, people who can actually make this happen and actually run efficient operations. So those are the other people that we're looking for.
Yeah. I guess just a question that just popped into my mind, especially in light of what we witnessed in the month of July. Nobody really saw the looting and the riots across the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. None of that was certainly expected. Is that something that's been factored into in terms of this particular diversified infrastructure fund that's been developed? Open to anyone on the panel, but Motlatsi, we'll throw it to you once more.
Yeah, I mean, the riots, as you know, were totally left field.
Yes.
So no one could have seen that coming or anticipated it in any way. So, I mean, to be truthful, I mean, we obviously didn't even think about things like that. So the things that we're looking for is, I mean, the word that you use is that we're looking for resilient technologies and resilient sectors, right? Those that can actually see through. Just incidentally, our own direct portfolio in this, on the community retail centers, we actually were very fortunate in that only one of our properties was hit by this, and even the damage that was that they suffered wasn't significant at all. they were able to, the security around were able to contain it. So I think it was a very, looking at it optimistically and not to be boasting, but we were actually very fortunate, our experience coming out of this. I don't know if you want to
Yeah, I suppose that we do need to face the fact that there is a need to rethink the social compact between the private sector and government.
Yes.
So for a lot of these projects to really scale up and for the private sector and the government to be successful in crowding in the funding, there needs to be consistency. There needs to be policy certainty. We need to see action on corruption. In terms of the rights that Motlatsi spoke about earlier, the people that are in the dock at the moment are sort of scapegoats. There's no real big names that are being held to account. So definitely the private sector is going to be less keen to be a junior partner if there is a trust deficit. So government really needs to come to the fore and address issues. And that's one of the reservations we have about some of the investments we start looking at, and we factor it in terms of the discount models, but it is an area that we do need to focus on. I think the president has made some very good steps in terms of achieving that, but we need more. We need the consistency, we need the policy certainty, we need individuals to be held to account, we need to see more alignment within the ruling party itself. So these are fundamental building blocks that are going to be multipliers and enablers for some of the visions that both the government and private sector share. So it's definitely something that should be addressed and addressed aggressively on both sides.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I must say, the other thing that I guess is worth pointing out is that the retail centers that I'm speaking about are really in the underserviced communities, right? So these
where
are
the investment is needed.
Absolutely, and this is it's not all rural, but it's certainly peri-urban and outside of the main centers. And that's not where the riots were. So that's why I guess our portfolio has been very positive. And the other good thing about these is that they act as catalysts for other services in the area.
Makes
so
sense.
you'll find that a lot of activity in these rural areas centers around where these retail centers are, where these community centers are. So they play a very central role just in the local development in the area. But I mean, in all, this is actually one of our more exciting portfolios, the diversified infrastructure one, simply because the mandate is so broad. And because we're putting equity capital in, it gives us we can leverage that quite significantly and be able to achieve so much more in this space.
You can't
So-
disappoint us, Motlatsi. You've given us 2 videos
Oh,
already.
yes, yes.
So I'm really looking forward to this one to unpack what the diversified infrastructure fund is
exactly. So this is why I'm really excited about this, because I really am punting it. Actually, on that note, I think we can look at the video then that just talks a little bit more about what's in that portfolio.
A strong infrastructure is the lifeblood that keeps countries and economies moving forward. From telecommunications to roads, water sanitation projects, and shopping malls in economic hubs that have previously been underserviced, these facilities and structures carry the flow of commerce that help build and develop the communities whose lives they touch. From an investment perspective, these projects deliver strong, stable, longer-term yields and form a powerful base to the Momentum Diversified Infrastructure Fund. The COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis of 2020 highlighted a need to build the structures that keep our country moving and allowed us to rethink much of how we live, work, and function on a day-to-day basis. Being part of the solution that drives us all forward is a source of great pride to Momentum Investments and forms part of our focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals around innovation, infrastructure, good jobs, and economic growth. Investing in an improved mobile and fiber network and in the Bakwena Platinum concession are bringing people closer together and helping to keep the vital links of commerce alive. Our investments in the Chuma Mall, Imala Mall, and Bloemfontein Mall, among others, create jobs, service communities, and deliver a tangible representation of how responsible investing can deliver so much more than just good returns for our investors. Because our vision towards sustainable investing is a holistic one, these locations are built with a sustainable, future-proof strategy where all parts of our economy integrate into a better, brighter future. Because with us, investing is personal.
I think it's been quite phenomenal for us to really get to witness much of the investments that are being made on the ground by Momentum Investments, and even identifying the multiple boxes that they tick. If you actually took a look at some of those retail centers, you would notice the solar on top of the rooftop. So hopefully as an audience member, that does give you the reassurance in terms of understanding how broad the mandate of Momentum Investments is in terms of making sure that responsible investing and those principles are certainly aligned with the investment opportunities that we identify. Motlatsi, this really does give us a bigger picture, a broader understanding and more insight into these multiple funds that have been highlighted. If I'm not mistaken, the Impact Fund, Momentum Social Infrastructure Fund, the Diversified Infrastructure Fund that we just saw a moment ago, and the Alternative Energy Fund that was also alluded to by Mike. I'm keen to understand, as we deep dive and continue to get more insight, many might say that the South African market is actually quite small and not agile enough for us to fully implement an ESG approach. How would you respond to some of those sentiments and arguments?
Yeah, so I guess on the second first about ESG, I mean, impact investing, we do this obviously as part of sustainable investing, which is obviously an element of responsible investing. So it goes without saying that ESG principles have to be front and center, right? So we've made sure obviously that ESG is integrated throughout the whole process. So to give you an idea, when we look at an opportunity, the first thing we do is obviously do a due diligence. But even before that, the first thing we do is actually go do an ESG assessment of the management of the project, of all of those factors around ESG. And if obviously they don't get a green light on that, the project stops unless they can actually remedy that. So that just shows how important that we take this, simply because we need to show that not only are we doing impact, but we're doing impact in exactly how impact should be done, right? So that's one of the ways. There are obviously other things that we do along the way. And part of that is that first we want to prove that ESG and impact investing work. Secondly is obviously to show our investors that they can actually, their buck is being put to work, right? So it's actually delivering what it needs to deliver. So we need to obviously make sure of that. And thirdly, because there's already so much guidance on how to do this, right? On how to report on impact, and how to report on ESG. So it would be quite foolhardy of us not to actually make sure that that's already part of the process. And just from our own perspective, we obviously need to take this into account and show that we are responsible with people's money and that we're doing the right thing with the responsibility that's been placed on us.
Mike certainly agreeing there. So quite clear that this is ingrained within the culture of Momentum Investments. But speaking of Momentum Investments, we're well aware that there's a conference, I understand, that will be happening in October later this year. And many of us might be intrigued to actually understand how can we participate, when should we participate, and most importantly, what we can look forward to, because what we've discussed here today really sets the bar and the standard in terms of opportunities that exist with responsible investing.
Yeah, so the conference in October, Gugu, we want to delve a bit more into this. So we'll be looking at case studies. We'll be looking at what's happening in some of our flagship projects, for instance. So we'll maybe go into more detail on what's happening and how we're actually monitoring, how we're measuring this, and how we're looking to report into this. So it was certainly, this was more of a teaser to give our audience an idea of what's happening. So we'll delve a bit more into detail into that. And what the other thing that we'll be looking to do, as you'll see there on screen, we'll try to go through all of the areas within alternative investments. Right now, I guess I've spoken very much on impact. However, we do have other areas that we cover within the alternative space. So we do high yield credit, for instance. Impact, I've spoken about that. Direct investments, we also have private equity strategies in there. And we also run hedge funds mandates. So we'll try and cover these and give our audience a lot more information about what we're doing in this space. So I don't know if you want to add on to the conference.
No, maybe just the context that annual conference, anyone is welcome. So please, I'd like you to join. I would love for the journalists to join as well. It's a thought leadership event where we showcase within our alternative space what we're about, what we're thinking about, the best of our ideas, but also the rest of our capabilities, our traditional asset management and solutions areas, what we're about and what we believe in. So it is a best opportunity to get the scoop on exactly what we're thinking about.
Very important mandate, as you say, to really give us some insight and detail into the approach that Momentum Investments is certainly undertaking.